Why isn't the church talking about the times when the most divorces happen? We know when it happens. It's objectively the case. But then when a guy expresses the one of two of the most challenges time in their marriage, all men on Twitter do is dump on other men. It's the same thing that women on Instagram do to each other. Do I look cute? No, you're ugly. Like it's the same women on women violence that they do to each other with fashion. We're doing it to with our marriages, where a man talks about this really, really difficult time, and men are just absolutely destroy him. No sympathy, no empathy whatsoever, as if they haven't gone through it either, or as if they have absolutely no idea what he's talking about. We should be talking about this. We should be warning men about this. We should be warning couples about this. Why aren't we doing that?
This week, there has been a tweet that went out that was just ratioed into oblivion on marriage and intimacy and stuff like this. This guy named Scott, maybe he's a real person, maybe not. And so this has gone viral. I put this on the screen for you so that you can see it. This has stirred up quite the discussion. There's some questions whether or not he's like even the real deal type of thing. And we wanted to talk about this today.
It's not so much the tweet itself, the post, whatever you want to call it. It's the reaction to it. And what's amazing is if you even want to have this discussion, you are apparently defending this guy. That's the only response
Yeah,
that people
right.
there's no nuance here allowed where you can say, "Hey, we probably shouldn't be tweeting about his wife and their intimate life on the X. Probably not a great idea." But also, "Hey, can we talk about what he's saying? Can we do that today? Can we not equate us wanting to talk about this as us defending his behavior or defending him at all? Can we do that?"
I mean,
Okay, cool.
because what he said was pretty controversial. Let's put it up here. Eric, do you want the surprise Mark Driscoll clip now, or do you want it later?
I don't know. I'm so excited because I
We'll
have
save it for
so
later.
much we have so much disdain for him.
Mark
I just
Driscoll has been one of those guys that we've talked about, and it feels like he just kind of gives it straight to men. Like Eric, you did that episode a long time ago now called "The Particular Sins of Women." Was it of women or men? Where we tend to focus in on the particular men more than women and the church. And Mark Driscoll is notorious for this in such a way that it seems like he's being real tough on men, but he won't actually say the real hard things that people don't want to get into, which is what we're going to get into a little bit today. So I'll put this tweet up here so that you guys know what we're talking about.
Yeah, being hard on men is an ear-tickling thing of the age. Like in today's culture, you can be hard on men all you want. And Mark Driscoll does the easy thing. He does the non-controversial thing while trying to seem like he's doing the controversial thing. Well, men don't want to hear this. What are you talking about? Men hear it all the time. Oh, well, I'm going to say the tough talking thing. No, you're not. You're saying the thing everybody is saying. That's Mark Driscoll's shtick. And I'm sick of it. And so I want more opportunities to take my little tiny hammer. He has a big sledgehammer. I have a little tiny hammer and smash him on the head with it.
So here's the tweet. He says, "My first is 8 weeks old. I can see why men cheat at this time. My wife completely ignored my existence for the first few weeks, and we have had to have arguments to get her to even acknowledge me, not to mention be intimate. That's the biggest challenge. Baby is easy."
So let's acknowledge a few things up front with this. Okay. He says he can see why people cheat. He didn't say that was okay. He didn't say he was doing it. Maybe he is. I don't know. I don't know this guy. Maybe that's what he's doing. But he's saying he can understand why. Then he says the reason is he's being neglected. Let's even say that he's being hyperbolic about she won't even pay attention to me. Whatever it is, hyperbole aside, their dynamic pre-baby is very different from their relational dynamic post baby. And he is feeling neglected. Can we all just be okay with that summary? Can we
That is
not
a
focus in
it's
on the things and make it crazy? Can we do that?
well, and to your point, this is very familiar, and to all of us who have had children, I think, and so I think maybe that's why it's stirred up a little bit, is that it has a sense of familiarity to it, but then there's also a sense where it he comes off as a little bit of a degenerate to a lot of people, like, oh, how dare he say what actually a lot of us think to ourselves, that this is a difficult transition that we're encountering here,
He
and
he shouldn't be emoting on the X machine. He shouldn't be going like, "I can see why men cheat." Like, he shouldn't that's something that people think, but that men think, but they shouldn't he shouldn't be saying it on X, okay?
right.
We get that. But if you're gonna sit Drew,
And for the
if
record, let me just I just feel like I need to go on record here. Sorry, I'm interrupting your rant, but like I don't mean that all of us married men with children and stuff have thought this would be really easy to cheat here. That's not what I said. What I said
yeah.
was this is a very difficult transition where we are refiguring out our intimacy. I feel like that is a very normal struggle to have. Okay, that's what I was saying. Sorry, continue with your rant.
No, no, just if you are going to sit there and tell me that you haven't had this transition that was super tough in you and your marriage, I'm not gonna believe you. If you can't admit that you understand where this dude is coming from, while disagreeing with what he's saying and while being like, "You don't say that out loud, bro. You gotta control yourself a little bit here." If you are not being able to be honest and say that your intimate relationship with your wife changed pre and post kids, I'm gonna think that there's some other agenda here. If you can't say that out loud, I'm gonna think that there's something else going on where you can't be honest about what is challenging in a marriage, what's challenging as a man. I don't. You got to just
Cue
be
the
honest with
anchor man.
yourself.
Like I don't believe you. I don't
I,
believe you.
I, I, you understand where this dude is coming from, and we can sit there. And what I don't want to do, and what we're not going to do, is we're not going to sit here and parse out and defend what he's saying or how he's saying it. Not going to do any of that. I'd have no need to defend this person or how he said things. What I want to talk about is the reaction to what he's saying, as if it's not a totally understandable, common male husband experience. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to get into the reaction. We're going to get into what it means. We're going to get into relational dynamics. That's what we're going to do. So here's what I want to talk about. Let's imagine for a second. Let's put the shoe on the other gender foot. Let's imagine for a second that a Christian woman went on the X machine and she said something to the effect of, "My husband got a new job. It was a work transition. He's traveling. He barely talks to me anymore. When he gets home, he is exhausted. He won't even have a conversation with me. All he wants to do is sit down and watch football and play video games because he's so exhausted. It's been 2 months, and we haven't had even a real conversation because of this new work. He got a promotion. It's so great that he got a promotion, but you know what? I can I can see why this is a people have emotional affairs. Or I could see how, if some man talked to me right now, I would want to talk to him. Like, I just need to talk to somebody. And if any man talked to me right now, I would want to talk to that man. I can see that. I can see that. If a Christian woman said that, everybody would be like, "Oh yeah, I understand. I understand what you mean. I understand what you mean." And everyone would understand that nobody is justifying her talking to other men. Nobody is, but it would be like, "Oh yeah, he needs to be more available to you." And this is a tough transition when these things happen. Everyone would kind of have some basic level of sympathy, empathy, understanding to the challenges in a marriage. I think that's what would happen.
For sure, and I think that the point that you've drawn to oh, okay, I'm not muting. The point that you've drawn to is that saying this would be difficult. He needs to emotionally support you doesn't mean because he's not, go ahead, you
Yeah,
know.
right.
In this
Right.
in the same way that we're saying in a familiar situation here, just because you're not having your physical intimacy needs met, that's difficult. And this brings me to this point, okay? That's difficult, and she should be fulfilling you in that respect. Can we say that part out loud? And this brings me to this point, okay? So I posted this I posted this on X because I like the smoke, but I did it on my personal profile because it's not our general shtick, and I didn't think that we were going to be getting much interaction on this.
And I
And
haven't really. That's true.
it's well, and this is the thing. We'll see how even this episode goes. People complain about us talking about Calvinism and Arminianism, and all you are is anti-Calvinists. And then we put out stuff like this that we feel like is important to modern day evangelicalism, to our own sanctification, to our own marriages, and then people just don't watch it. That's fine. We probably won't get very many views on this unless for some reason it goes crazy viral, which I doubt. But this is what I had to say to this. And since we're theology geeks, Bible nerds, and all this different stuff, I wanted to see what the Bible says about this, right? Because ultimately, this dude, I don't know if he's a Christian or not. I mean, there's some room as to whether or not he even swings that way and maybe swings another way, type of thing. It's just don't go down the rabbit hole. The point is, the Bible has some instructions on this, and I think it's important for us to look at it. And so I'll bring this up kind of facetiously at first of what I put out there, and then we'll read the whole passage together. And now I have 1 Corinthians 7, and I've just highlighted a little bit, and I posted this saying this is what the evangelicals 1 Corinthians 7 says in their Bible, essentially. And then I put this up here, and you'll notice, if you're familiar with the passage, you'll notice some things that are missing. Okay. A husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife. A husband does not have the right over his own body, but his wife does. Do not deprive one another except when you agree, then come together again. There's a lot that's missing there, as most of you will be familiar with, and I'll just bring up the full passage here so that you can compare and contrast. So here it says, now in response to the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, but because sexual immorality is so common, each man should have sexual relations with his own wife, and each woman should have sexual relations with her own husband. A husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise a wife to her husband. A wife does not have the right over her own body, but her husband does. This is part of the part that I left out earlier. In the same way, a husband does not have the right over his own body, but his wife does. Do not deprive one another, except when you agree for a time to devote yourselves to prayer. That was another part that I left out. Then come back together again. Otherwise, Satan may tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So you can see that there are some important things here. There's the husband's body doesn't just belong to him, but it belongs to the wife, and the wife's body doesn't just belong to her, it belongs to the husband. There's a mutualness here about this, and the only reason why we, as individual separate married couples, are not supposed to come together in this way is if we're dedicating ourselves to a time of prayer and fasting, and you've actually, like, it's something that you've agreed upon. And it's just been interesting that, and we have another friend, a friend of the podcast, who posted just this part here. A husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise a wife to her husband. Now it's interesting because in the context here, this is about sexual duties on both parties' behalf, right?
Right.
It's not saying the husband should fulfill his duty of having emotionally intimate conversations. I don't know. Maybe you can kind of extrapolate that by saying, like, this is how women are become sexually interested or something. I don't know. Anyways, and so
It is.
and so this friend of the podcast who will remain unnamed because I don't think it's important and I'm not trying to start a fight or anything, but he posted long before I posted actually this little scribbled out section, just this part to kind of try to get the patriarchalists in an uproar. And I just thought it was really interesting. And I don't think it was intentional on his part that he left out the latter half, presumably because he was trying to get a particular audience upset. And so I tried to do the same thing for my little account, for my wee little account, personal account on X, and it just got no interaction. It's just like not a single like,
Well,
nothing.
well, I know of a situation, and I'm not. That. This isn't that common, but I think it's more common than people think, where the wife is starved for physical attention and the man is not fulfilling it. That does happen. I know of a marriage who broke up pretty much for that reason. He was just not interested, and she was, and he did not fulfill this duty. Now, most of the time, it is more about being emotionally available. Women tend to say, since I can trust you with my heart, I can trust you with my body. Men tend to say, since I can trust you with my body, I can trust you with my heart. Like that's sort of usually how that works. But there are women who are different. There are men who are different. It does happen more often than you think. So I'm using the test case of, if you think and you would advise a man that no matter what is going on with his job, no matter what kind of transition he's in with a promotion or work or travel or something like that, that he needs to die to himself. It's sometimes not fun. Sometimes my wife sits down next to
Usually,
me, and I can tell it's a time for me to listen to an emotional brain dump. Sometimes not the funnest thing. I don't want to do that right now. Maybe I'm in the middle of something, or I just got done with work and my decision fatigue, my emotional fatigue is up. I don't want to do that right now. If you are saying that I need to die to myself, and you rightly recognize that I need to die to myself in that moment and be emotionally available to my wife, but you cannot say the opposite. You cannot call women to die to themselves and acknowledge, let's go to the back to the scenario in the tweet, that postpartum is a time where, and this is scientifically the case, that there is a hormone where there's only two ways women get this hormone. Two ways. It's a bonding hormone, and there's two ways women get it.
it's
Sexual
oxytocin,
intimacy,
isn't it?
oxytocin, oxycontin. Did I say, is that the
I'll,
drug?
I'll you didn't say anything. You just said a hormone. I'm going to fact check us
Oh,
while you
hormone.
continue.
Oxytocin. I think that's right. It's oxytocin. There's two ways. They get it through intimacy and breastfeeding. That's it. Those are the only two ways they get it. So, in a very real sense, what your wife was getting from you, she is now getting from baby. This is a tough time for a man. This is a tough time for her. She's figuring out lots of things. It's a very difficult transition. If you can say to the man that no matter what is going on, you still need to fulfill your marital duties and die to yourself for your wife, but you won't say it in the opposite direction. You can't say it. You want to downplay. I would suggest to you that you are biased. I would suggest to you that there are other concerns besides what the Bible says, besides healthy marriages and healthy relationships, that are guiding your focus and guiding what you will say. That is the bias that I and Drew and I see in evangelical circles online. And it is the bias that this kind of controversial post brings out. And it's the conversation I think we need to have.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And it it certainly does just seem that we're not willing to say that other half, that the
We're
death
just
to
simply
self
unwilling.
thing
Yeah.
only goes in one direction. And it's interesting because it's almost like, from my perspective, a sort of hyper complementarianism where the man is the hero, he's the leader, so he has to do all of the dying to self. Is what it is, the way that it seems to come out to me, that all of the men are going to white knight for their wives and they're going to die to themselves, never mind the marital duties, obligations on the other side of things. And it's not just obligation and duty, it is about intimacy and growth and about the mutual health of the relationship. Because if you're not connecting, then you're wilting, right? And so it's not just
That's right.
for the man as though it's
Do
some
you
kind of like
care about how
unilateral thing that you're.
is intimacy in a marriage a good thing? Do you think so? Do you want to see healthy marriages and families? Is that a good thing? Don't you think so? So why are evangelical men so reluctant to call their sisters in Christ to this thing in a public square? Why is this something that we won't say out loud when we know and believe these things are good things? No one is saying it's not challenging. It you use the word white knight. I think that's really interesting. That's a good way to put it because if you are telling me that that your wife doesn't have power over you and in this area, she has the ultimate power over you. And you don't have another licit allowable outlet for this. You don't have it. It's not available to you. You can get it, but it's illicit and it leads you to destruction. You don't have another licit outlet for this. She has ultimate power over you. If you are telling me that you think that you can white knight that and white knuckle that while she has all the power over you and just does not and holds it over you, doesn't give it to you, and then you're just, yep, I am able and willing for whatever period of time it is, for what and whatever the situation is, I'm gonna white knight for my wife, and that you aren't admitting your vulnerability and weakness in that area. I'm sorry, I don't think that comports with reality. I'm sorry. I don't believe you.
And part of this comes from at the risk of being a little bit of an armchair marriage counselor, I still feel like a newlywed. I mean, we've been married since, 2018. I'm trying to do the math. 6 years isn't very. I mean, Eric, how long have you been married now?
17.
So, just the drop of the bucket compared to 17 years. But
No.
the, that's how I feel. I don't know. So, it, you know, at the risk of being this armchair counselor person, we part of what Eric just said is that we have to be able to be willing to sit down and say, I'm struggling. We need to, figure this out. I know this is new for you. This is new for me. Yeah. It's same with the woman with the situation that you gave in terms of the man having a new promotion. It's not sufficient on either side to just grow bitter and just be like,
That's right.
oh, grumble, grumble, and then complain to your friends about it without actually having the conversation. That's part of what the communication is. It's part of what vulnerability is. And I think that's
Right.
difficult for us guys, especially to say, this is hard. I'm feeling rejected, man, I'm grumpy, all this other different stuff. And so I guess I just say that even though that may seem obvious, the conversations need to be had surrounding
Well,
this
we need to be having these conversations in the church. We need to
corporately.
be
Yeah.
if corporately, if you are involved in your church and you know men in your church and you younger men in your church who are having children or still in that phase of having children, you need to, hey, watch out. Maybe that doesn't work. Where you walk up to him and be like, that's gonna stink for a few while after you don't you can't do that. But hey man, how are you doing? No, really, how are you doing though? How's things after baby? It's different, huh? Different, huh? Start having those conversations. Do I think that teachers from the pulpit should do it? Yeah, I really, really do. Here is a danger. Here is a danger zone. And you said armchair marriage counselor. I actually have graduate level marriage counseling experience. I took graduate level classes, marriage counseling. I've done the certifications. I've done it before. If you look up, don't take my word for it. Look it up. The two times where divorces happen the most is first kid arrives, last kid leaves. So your first kid and then empty nest. That's when your marriage relationship changes the most, those two times. And that's when most of the divorces happen. Why isn't the church talking about the times when the most divorces happen? We know when it happens, it's objectively the case. But then when a guy expresses the one of two of the most challenges time in their marriage, all men on Twitter do is dump on other men. It's the same thing that women on Instagram do to each other. Do I look cute? No, you're ugly. Like it's the same women on women violence that they do to each other with fashion. We're doing it to with our marriages, where a man talks about this really, really difficult time, and men are just absolutely destroy him. No sympathy, no empathy whatsoever, as if they haven't gone through it either, or as if they have absolutely no idea what he's talking about. We should be talking about this. We should be warning men about this. We should be warning couples about this. Why aren't we doing that?
Yeah, and it's harmful on both sides. Like, not talking about it is harmful to not just the men, but the women as well, because it's needed on both sides. And I'm glad you brought up divorce. I want to say something controversial here. Okay. So here's, I would encourage you guys, if you're new here or if you haven't seen it in a while, go back. We did two different episodes on remarriage and divorce. And Eric and I are on the much more, conservative end of divorce. And a lot of people, Eric and I don't agree with this, and Eric and I are a little bit different on this, but we'll just say that abuse, neglect, abandonment, and adultery are just bye. See ya. That's
Yeah.
just like that's breaking the marriage covenant. You can get divorced and so on. And there's a process that needs to happen. There's a church discipline process that needs to happen. Now I'm thinking about, and Eric, this is going to strike home with you because you've dealt with a lot of this and are dealing with this in terms of some of the things that you're doing extracurricularly. And so
Yes.
the you take a woman who, if a woman wants to be out of a marriage, if she wants to be out of a marriage, what does she have to do? She just starts withholding and freezing her man out, right? And then, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years pass. Someone at the office shows her attention. Let's say that it's just an emotional affair that he gets involved or whatever and stuff. And then he comes and he has a conversation with about it. It comes to light. The church is in such a state now that that's just like, tell him, see you later. He cheated on you, whether it's emotionally or actual adultery, it doesn't really matter. There's a process that goes through, there's a church discipline process that goes through, and that doesn't just break the covenant. And so then you've got these men that maybe they have sought comfort in a sinful way, in a way that they could have done otherwise and should have done otherwise, but they're caught in the situation. And then where is the church? Where is this corporate teaching surrounding divorce and remarriage, the sexual obligations and stuff between a husband and a wife? It's nowhere to be found. And it's a problem. Like,
Well, what
you
will
would be
happen, like
support.
in your scenario, what will happen is that it will be the same situation. This is why we're talking about this. He will be found out, and then he will be discarded. So all his elders, pastors, friends, they're gone. They have nothing to do with him, and she is free to just leave. And she will never be, even if it comes to light, and he says, "Hey, she did this. Like she didn't touch me for 6 months." It will be like, so you shouldn't have done that, which is true. So you'll say the true thing. He shouldn't have. You'll say that, but she will never be told, or what it should be. This is how it should be. This is why we're having this conversation. It should be her freezing out is just as much an abandonment of the marriage covenant as his adultery. That might be a hot take. That might be spicy. She neglect is a breaking of the marriage covenant. It's destructive to the marriage. It violates the passage that we just that we just read, and it violates that. You are breaking the marriage relationship when you neglect, and so it should be seen in the same way, but it's not right now, and we need to balance that out for the sake, not for the sake of adulterous men. That's how you're going to hear me. Oh, you're defending adulterous men. That's that's not what's happening right now. It needs to be balanced so that we have healthy marriages and healthy families. If you want to see less divorce, if you want to see children in a healthier place, if you want to see adults and marriages in a healthier place, then this needs to be balanced where just like men are being told you need to control your sexual urges, true, uh, women need to be told you have to take care of your husband in that way. You have the ultimate power over him, and you need to use that power in grace and in patience, long suffering, if that's how you see it, towards your weaker brother. Your husband is weak in this area, women. Your husband is weak in this area. It's an area of weakness. Paul right there says that Satan will sift you using this. This will be a way that Satan will get into your marriage. You have the ultimate power over him. You need to take care of him, just like he takes care of you in other areas, whether that's around the house, financially, whatever. Just like he sacrifices uh, for you there, and that's good for him to do. You need to sacrifice for him in this area because that's good for both of you. This needs to be said all the time because we say the other thing all the time.
Can we even, my question through this broadcast and to our viewers, most of our viewers, I think the stats are 30 to 45 men. And the percentage is high. It's like 95%, I think, last time I checked. We'll see who this episode attracts. Maybe we'll catch some of our sisters with it. I don't know. Are we even allowed to say this out loud? I wonder if this is like, if even saying this, because I don't often hear this. I think I remember one time from a pulpit where a pastor back home said, in probably the worst way possible, that
Yeah,
your husband is like a dog. If he doesn't eat, then he'll go into the trash and eat trash. So you have to like feed him at
it's
home or something like that.
it's
And it's just like the worst. I mean, the analogy strikes, I guess, in terms of a dog has needs of food. I don't know. Anyways, so we won't go down that rabbit hole much, but
no, you're right. It's been done so badly that people stay away from it. Uh, but there are good ways you could talk about this. It's yeah. Why aren't we allowed to be honest about uh, the weaknesses and strengths of men and women and how we both need to help each other in our strengths and in our weaknesses? Because what happens in a relationship, lots of relationships are different. Relationships are very, very complicated. When you get into the details of an actual relationship, it's very complicated. However, there are common things that happen all the time, and we should the ebbs and flows of life, how relationships change over time with marriage and children. Why aren't we talking about this and preparing men and women for these things? Why why aren't we saying to women, "Hey, listen, however your intimate life is right now, it may be super easy. Like it may just be going on all cylinders, like it's good. There will come a time, ladies, when it's not that easy. Let me tell you, you still need to work on it. You still have to be particular with it because men aren't like dogs, hopefully. They're like trains. Trains go in one direction. They go in one direction. It's how it is. And the thing
no
that men have
starters.
to understand, and the thing that men have to understand is that we're like microwaves. You can just press a button and we're there, right? The food's heating up. Women are like ovens. It takes you there's a preheating and you've got to work at it. You've got to figure out in your relationship how you preheat that oven. You have to do it. That is your job if you want the other thing on the other side. And we
And
don't
some
say
and
these
some
things
of
to men.
that and some of that is what you've already highlighted: the financial provision, the budgeting in terms of security, the emotional support that you give. For my wife, we like to talk about future plans. She has her future plans, and then she wants to tell me, and I'm just like a here in the moment type of guy, and I'm like, yes, please, darling, tell me all about your future plans. And so that's part of something that I can do is listen, that kind of provides that's emotionally, heating her oven and so on. Just sounds weird saying that.
Well, no, but I mean, like,
And
yeah, that doesn't lead. We're not talking about at the time, like let's have a conversation and things go somewhere. That's not. It's if you are there for her, you know what I mean. If that is a pattern in your relationship that you are willing to have unfun future plan conversations, and you're actually
at
there,
11
you're not
p.m.
like at 11 p.m. You're actually not like, oh, yeah, babe, whatever. Like if you're actually there, you know, that men have a responsibility in this too. We are allowed to talk about that. Like I've heard that all the time, where it's have you what about the one with Anthony Mackie? Have you seen that recently? I've sent it to you before, where it's make daddy a sandwich.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah, it's been a while, but yeah.
The point of that is that he says something utterly normal, meaning if you want protection and you want me to do the yard, you bring me out a glass of iced tea. Like if that's, he says something utterly obvious, and he has to win the audience over. At first the audience is like, "Oh," but then he wins them over because he's charismatic and he makes a good point. But if we were to say the other thing, we wouldn't have to win the audience over. The other thing being, hey, man, you have an obligation that there are certain things that you need to do if you want the payoff on the end. You don't need to win the audience over. The audience is already there. And we're pointing out why is that the case? If we want healthy marriages and healthy children, we should be able to say both with a balance.
And this is what the culture has done to us, And by way of analogy, I was working at a it doesn't matter what I was doing. A fellow the Spanish words are coming to mind. Hang on. What do
That's
you call a
hilarious.
person? A colleague that I was working with.
Polyglot problems.
Yeah, was talking to a sister and saying, "Hey, can I help you with this or can I help you with this?" And she was like, "No, no, no." And then he kind of facetiously said, "Oh, well, I try to help this, oh, no, no, this, that, or the other." And I looked at him and I said, "Look at what feminism has done to our sisters," like, in the sense that he was genuinely, trying to help out and doing all this different stuff. And she was saying no. And I don't really know that that was like her motive or whatever, or that it was even a byproduct of it, but it just felt like a funny thing to say at the time. And they laughed. So it went over well, I guess. But, and this is what feminism has done to our culture in terms of like you don't need to gain the support of what you just said, Eric, right? Like they're on board already, but we can't even say the other quiet part out loud, even among Christians, even among evangelicals, and I'm grouping myself in this milieu of this cultural moment. And so it's important for us to talk about this.
We can sit there and say what men's obligations are, with Paul's principle of being patient and gracious to a weaker brother. We can say that all the time. Maybe you don't drink it in front of somebody who has a drinking problem. You kind of withhold, you restrict yourself around people who might have sinful issues with that. But we won't extend that same principle to wives.
Right. Right.
Everybody's a victim except for the men. This is so hard for men. We get taken advantage of, we get used and abused, we get cheated on, we get screwed. Some of you, your life has been a series of unjust deeds against you. Some of you, it started with your parents and they weren't good to you, or dad was violent and abusive or absent. You've had girlfriends cheat on you or betray you. Maybe you married a woman and that ended up in divorce, or right now it's in a very painful place. You've worked for employers who did you wrong, didn't compensate you, didn't promote you, didn't honor you or respect you. Some of you have served in ministries and churches and you feel like the way you got treated was really not healthy and helpful. Some of you in your friendships, you realize they were just using you and taking advantage advantage of you. They didn't really care about you. And some of you, your own children, they've gutted you, they've betrayed you, they've abandoned you, they've ignored you. The only time they call you is when they want money from you. And as a man, there is this sense of justice that rises up in us. And I know we're not supposed to say this in our culture.
I don't have any idea what his point was there. And they clipped this out. I was impressed at first that he was actually acknowledging the man's struggle instead of like just hammering on him. But otherwise, I don't have any idea what he was saying. Did it surprise Eric? Did it surprise you that he was like, "We're victims too"?
I'm pleasantly surprised. I was you started playing the clip. I saw his face, and I was ready to get triggered. But he's actually acknowledging the plight of men, and even when it's so funny, you and I both know that we have this ENTP interlocutor in our brains who argues with us when we say things out loud. And even when I use the phrase plight of men, I can hear the eye roll from people who hear that phrase. Plight of men, give me a break. I can hear that, as if men don't have a plight, and I don't even think that needs to be explained. But it's very interesting. It was pleasantly surprising. He doesn't really make a point. I don't know. He did the preacher thing where he tries to make it relate to everybody, and he picks subsections, and he just like fills his time with examples. So he did kind of the preacher filler thing. And it was, good examples. He was accurate with those, but I don't know what his point was, except maybe he was actually just talking about how we have a victimhood culture, but but men aren't allowed to see themselves in that way, or get a piece of that sort of victimhood sympathy pie. Like we don't really get that, no matter how victimized we've actually been by the actions of others. And yeah. How does that?
And
How does that? I think that you asked. I think that does relate to what we're talking about here, because what we're saying, and this can kind of be a summary. I'll give my summary. You can give yours. I think what we're saying here is that, like what Mark Driscoll is talking about, when a man, let's forget about the details, let's forget about all the extraneous circumstances. Let's just go with this for a second. When a man complains or says something that expresses something that's hard about particularly male needs, particularly male perspective, particularly male things, whether that's, in this case, it's in a marriage, the response is always imbalanced. It's always man up, white knight it, white knuckle it. Just what is your problem? One of the tweets underneath what we saw there was like, that's called a porn problem. Wait a minute. So the only way a man feels neglected postpartum after 8 weeks is if he watches porn. That's the only way. Maybe that guy does. I don't know. We're not talking about him. But the response is, what? That's the only, because he lacks self-control. So where is that in the Bible? Where is it in the Bible that men have to deal with whatever their wife throws at them, whatever neglect their wife hands them, and white knuckle it in self-control? Is that
because
the biblical model?
we would never do that the other way around, right? But the point is that the virtue, the virtuous dying to self-action only points in one direction with this stuff, it seems to me.
But even if you use our example of neglect, he's neglecting her physically or emotionally. You would never tell her to just die to herself. That's not how that would work. And
Right.
so what we're talking about here is, what we want to see is a healthy, honest dialogue about the challenges and needs of both men and women in marriages in Christian circles. and that this should be something that should be talked about from pulpits. This would be something that we should be able to talk about on the social medias, and have a balanced approach as to what makes a healthy relationship. And you can want it to be true all you want, but hey, men, white knuckle it no matter what your wife throws at you doesn't make for healthy marriages. I don't think you can do it. I don't think most men can do it. And there are some incredibly amazing, virtuous men that I know that have dealt with their wives and their medical issues and things like that. And they're saints. They are saints. And hopefully, when I get older and if my wife has medical problems, I can be there too by the grace of God. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about relational dynamics, balancing that out, and having an honest dialogue about how our sisters in Christ, our wives, what power they have over us, and how they can serve us with that power, just like we need to serve them with their power. What is so terrible about abuse? Think about that for a second. What is so terrible about physical abuse? What is so terrible about physical abuse is that it's a man using his power for his own ends, to get what he wants out of it. He's whatever lack of control, whatever he gets out of that violent encounter, to assuage his own pain, to make somebody hurt because he wants to see them hurt. He's using the power that all men have, and he's not serving with it. He's using it for his own ends. That is what is so horrible about it. And yet, women have power over us too. And we need to have this balanced conversation. We can say the other thing, but we need to be able to say the unpopular thing. We need to be able to say the unpalatable thing, the thing where you do have to win the audience over and how you say it. We need to be able to talk about this, or we're going to continue to not have healthy marriages. We're going to continue to have men and women who go into their first child blind to how hard this is going to be, because they just think first baby, amazing. And it is. And then you got to figure it out. It's the hardest time. It really was. Every single one of my kids, it was the hardest time in our marriage. And I didn't have words to put it this way because I didn't have people talking to me about it. And we figured it out. But a lot of people don't, and we should do our best, right? Not to help them, instead of just pouring more coals on men's heads.
And I think that's one thing that is my takeaway from this is, for instance, the other day we were talking to a mentor person, Kirsty and I, and he just acknowledged that this is tough. This is really hard, you know. And that just all of a sudden it just dawned on me. I was like, he's right. This is hard. This is tough, you know, and you just really appreciate that. And then things look different and you begin to see things look differently. And it's helpful to have somebody say that. Can we say that about a situation like this? That sounds tough. Like, you know, can we acknowledge that this is something that we go through? And then that does need to segue into all of the other things that we've been talking about. But let's start by at least acknowledging the problem, or a challenge that many of us men face. And most of you listening here are men that have tuned in. We appreciate you being here. So hopefully that connects to you and downloads a little bit. Eric, do you have any closing and exhortation? So we've talked about like the women that are watching. What most of our folks watching are men. What do we want them to walk away with?
You need to do the thing that's really hard for you to do, and you need to talk about it. You need to talk about it. Why did this Malaka post this on X? If I could armchair psychologize him a bit, because it was easier for him. He needed to say it out loud, and he said it in a bad way.
Yeah.
To someone, he needed to say it, and he didn't do it in a healthy way. So, but he needed to say it. And, you know, you need to keep saying it. You have to talk about it. You can even tell her There was one story that always stuck with me, and this is something that helped in my marriage. Was we were discussing this issue of sex and marriage in class. This is in class, men and women in this class. So you talk about these things straightforwardly, but delicately. And it was in a story about a counseling situation, and it was in the marriage, the wife would flirt with the man, and touch him and flirt with him and stuff, and then nothing would happen. Like, she would just go about her day, he'd go about his day, nothing would happen that night, nothing would happen. And she didn't understand why that it was caused a problem for them. And the truth is that men, okay, once we're freight trains. Once it goes in that direction, there's only one direction that goes. Once our brain is like, is this happening? Then that is where it has to happen, or there's frustration. And she's a woman. She doesn't really understand that. And it took her husband being vulnerable and crying to her and saying, when you do this, with tears on his face, when you do this, I can't tell you how much that hurts me. I can't tell you how physically frustrating that is. I can't tell you. And she finally saw his emotion and saw how she was hurting him in her flirtatiousness without following through. And that changed their dynamic. So you don't have to cry, but you have to be vulnerable. You have to acknowledge this. Look, you have power over me. I can't get this anywhere else. And I it's not a virtue for you to say you don't need it. It's not a virtue for you to act like you're just fine. You're going to stoicism, white knuckle it. That's not a virtue. You're being dishonest with yourself. And there's probably a few of you that can, actually. There's probably a few of you, but most, I cannot. Most cannot. And so you
And
have to
this
have you have to be vulnerable and have the conversations. The thing you don't want to do.
and this brings us back to the Bible passage, and you said it, Eric. It's so that the enemy doesn't tempt us, because he wants to destroy us. He wants to destroy our marriage. Some of us, like myself and many others, have seen how it's affected us as children, with parents being divorced and just the destruction that it causes. I mean, man, like, Satan really wants to sift this, especially us Christians, in this regard. He wants to ruin our witness. I mean, how many people have looked at broken marriages and all this other different stuff and just said, I don't want anything to do with Christianity if this is how their marriages and all this other different stuff looks. And in fact, in New Zealand, it as far as our experience goes, and as far as my wife's experience goes, it's very rare for Christians to get divorced in New Zealand. At least in her community, it seemed to be that way.
That's amazing.
Whereas it was quite common growing up for me, like, practically my whole family, has been through a divorce of some kind.
What would it be like? What would it be like if the world, the culture, knew that the church was a place that marriages were talked about, protected, fought for, that families and marriages were a place where those things happen, that marriages and families were fought for, protected? How would the culture view us?
They would flood our doors. They would come in. They would want to hear. They would want to listen. I mean, I have a friend who grew up in the church, who I just recently heard has gotten divorced in the past year. It came as a bit of a shock to me. He kind of left the church, and because of the whole TDS type stuff. If we had this sort of stuff on offer, he'd be right there. But what do we have to offer him? What do we have to offer him in this regard, except
do better?
Sorry about it. Sorry about it. Find somebody else. Basically, I mean, this is our message.
That's right.
The whole serial, if the whole serial adultery thing that we talked about in our others. If you want to get into the spice, you can get on there. Every now and again in our notifications, I get like a comment on that episode that's like, oh, this episode's pinged somebody else again. It's usually either like wholehearted agreement or just completely like, you guys are off your rocker and type stuff. So you can check that out. I'll link that in the description. I think we might even have like a divorce and remarriage playlist that I put together. I think it might only have 2 or 3 episodes on it.
This one's going.
We'll add this one up there.
Yeah.
if you appreciate this content, this video, give us a like. Even if you don't like it, give us a like anyways. If you made it this far, you must like it. Also, if you want to join the Patreon team, patreon.com/provisions perspective. Anything you can do buying us coffee and stuff on there really helps out, helps us to put this stuff out there, especially when it's something that's pre-recorded and has to be edited and all that other different stuff. But as always, you're blessed, so go be a blessing.
See ya.